Welcome to today's conversation. I'm also gonna let you know that we will have some time at the end if you wanted to ask a question. But if you did have a question, maybe just drop that in the chat so we can kind of keep an eye on that and know if there's a lot of questions. I want to make sure we might have some time. But if you're just liking what you're hearing and you want to keep going with it, then we'll just keep going. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with our guest today. We have Pastor Josh Finley, who is our guest today for this conversation. So fun fact, Pastor Josh was actually my youth pastor back in the day, back when I did not want a youth pastor, but he didn't really give me much of a choice. And for that, I'm really grateful. And then he went on to be the lead pastor at Elam Gospel Church up until a few years ago when him and his wife Anna and their boys packed up, and now they serve in Maryland with Freedom Church. And on top of all that, he's staying busy with traveling and speaking and ministering to pastors and leaders. He's an author and a coach, and I know for a fact he has a jam-packed schedule. So I just want to thank him and honor him for making time to be with us today. So PJ, Pastor Josh, welcome to our huddle.
Let's jump into the lines then.
let's just take a deep breath and just move forward.
No, it's great. I'm glad you picked such a relevant topic, because everyone's talking about it at the dinner table. It's a conversation that we're having with our kids, family members, friends that we agree with, disagree with, all of that. So I think it's good we're talking about it.
And I think in some way, shape, or form, whether we've had a very public canceling or some sort, we've all probably, in a way, been canceled by whether it be one person or the whole country. I don't think anyone here has that experience, but in some way, shape, or form. So yes, like you said, it is a very hot topic, and it's actually been around for a really long time, in my opinion. It just now has the name that we know it as, but we've seen this trend go on for a while. We just never had a name for it. So before we get started, in your own words, what is cancel culture, and how have you witnessed it in the past or even most recently? What is your definition of
Sure.
it?
Well, I think you said it. It's nothing we haven't seen before in history. I'm kind of a history nerd, so I love to study history. Even biblical history, governments have been trying to silence certain voices. That's why John the Baptist's head was served up, whether they were voices of prophetic truth that wasn't wanting to be heard, or people were, saying dangerous things. I think one of the ironies is that, we've got to be careful. We have a culture right now that claims to be very, very tolerant, and yet many times it's certain communities that are demanding the heads of people that are saying things they don't agree with, under this umbrella of tolerance. And so there is like this dangerous hypocrisy, I think, with cancel culture. I guess my concern is that every time history repeats itself, the price goes up. So we have to learn from history. I think a lot of cancel culture, some of the early seeds of it was the politically correct movement. You think back into the early 90s and even before that, but certainly in the 90s, there was like this politically correct terminology that was coined, and it really just began to kind of put people into boxes, and even gave people the ability to other and categorize other people. I think defining terms is really important, because even like the term progressive, man, I want progress. I hope most people I'm around in my life want progress. I just don't fit in the box of a progressive. The word conservative, there's a whole lot of things that I want to conserve, even in the midst of needed reform in our country, but I may not fit 100% in the box of conservative. But because people aren't comfortable with the tension, we just, for people, it's not easy to label someone, but we're really quick to do it. And so cancel culture touches both sides of the aisle, but it's not evenly distributed on the right and the left. There are more conservatives that are being canceled. I'm going to give some examples of people that are not conservative being canceled. But I'll just give you one example without giving the woman's name. She's an influential Asian American. She tweeted, she said, "I fantasize about the agonizing death of old white men." And here is a very educated, very influential writer who is saying, I hate the patriarchy, but because it fits a quote, woke narrative, it gets a free pass from cancel culture. And I'm thinking, my gosh, if Pastor Chris tweeted that he fantasized about the agonizing death of old white men, he'd be crucified because of the category of person he's in. And I just think the hypocrisy of that is not great. And so honestly, my question is, who becomes the arbiter of truth? Is it trolls on the internet? Is it the angry mob? Is it woke CEOs trying to appease a segment of their customer population and customer base? It doesn't seem equally distributed. And so one of the things I'm just going to quickly hit is, as I was pulling together some notes, I call it the 3 Ds of cancel culture. The 3 Ds of cancel culture. The first one is cancel culture shows up when people get deplatformed. Either they lose access to social media, their ideas can't spread. It's really kind of a form of, it's a polite way of saying no more freedom of speech for that person. It's a form of censorship. And deplatforming people can happen when big tech and companies say, hey, you've said something we don't like, so we're going to take it down. Or kind of even scarier is they can say, we don't like you and your message, and so we are going to preemptively deplatform you before you can say something in the future. And bonus, we kind of get to intimidate everyone who's watching it happen to you. That's something that I don't like. Even if I vehemently disagree with what they're saying, I don't like that aggressive preemptive deplatforming that can happen. So the first one I would say is cancel culture. It deplatforms people. Number 2, it doxes people. Not a lot of people think about this as cancel culture, but doxing people is when, if I don't agree with you and we serve on a school board, or an example of this came in Michigan or Washington on the election review committees, if I don't agree with you and you're not going to vote the way I want you to vote on a certain issue, I'm going to dox you, which means I'm going to share your private information publicly on the internet, where you live, who you vote for. And I'm hoping that people are going to show up at your house to intimidate you or worse. And there's a lot of doxing going on within power groups that I think is just, that's just terrifying for the average citizen, that they could be doxed when they don't want their information shared, where they live, where their, wife and kids live. So deplatforming, doxing. And then the last one, this is probably the biggest problem I have with cancel culture, is destroying people. There honestly is no redemption with cancel culture. And this is where I find it antithetical to the gospel. The gospel says every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Like, all of us have things that we've said and done that are shameful or we're embarrassed of. But the gospel says there's redemption, there's forgiveness, there's correction, all of that. Cancel culture, there's none of that. We're going to get you fired, lose your income, your career, loss of reputation, loss of your voice, loss of influence, and hopefully serve as an example to shut others up that are like you. And give a couple quick examples, and I'll hand it over to you, Taryn, for some other questions. But Terry Crews, the actor, who was an athlete, I think he was a football star, Dancing with the Stars, all of that. He put out a tweet and he just said, hey, listen, it's not a good idea to replace white supremacy with black supremacy. And cancel culture tried to eat him alive. And he was just saying, hey, listen, one of the reasons I don't like the logo of BLM with the black fist is because it really does represent a whole lot of things associated with the fist of communism in other nations. But Terry Crews was just saying, hey, listen, I'm an African American man, and I don't think that the answer is to create a culture of black supremacy as we go against racism. Another one, Kevin Hart, a lot of people know, he made some off-color comedic statements. Interestingly, a lot of times throughout history, God will raise up prophetic voices among comedians and artists, like music artists. And even yesterday, I think it was Eric Clapton that said he's going to be one of the first artists that won't perform in venues that banish people that haven't received the vaccination. And he's getting some flack for that because he doesn't like segregation of any kind. whether or not vaccinated or not. And I think person, little superficial things. Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Do you have a vaccination? Do you not have vaccine? Because 20 years ago, you apologize and be forgiven, and you may have a PR nightmare on your hands. But now cancel culture won't stop at an apology. They literally are destroying people's lives. The female actress from Mandalorian, Gina Carano, basically Disney and Lucasfilm said, because of your conservative values and because you were talking about Trump and conservative things, you're not going along with the studio's narrative, was their quote. And that's why they wanted to let her go from the Mandalorian series. And then I think even Owen Stevens, from the area at SUNY Geneseo, he was suspended from school because his private Instagram said a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And here was his private Instagram account, but the school said, listen, you're not going along with our culture. Now, obviously we need to have humility. Obviously we need to have compassion with people that we disagree with. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, in our other questions. But the biggest thing for me is that cancel culture does not jive with the gospel because it's not redemptive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think, and that kind of what you were, one of the last examples you gave kind of touches a little bit more of another question. Because right now, cancel culture, like you said, I think you see it a lot more with celebrities right now because that's kind of where all the attention goes. But it's also affecting, like you said, Christians. So I think one or two things, a few things could happen. One of them being we ourselves might be like, I don't know if I should say this because I don't want to be canceled in whatever platform I have, whether it just be on my social media with my friends or my family, or whatever. So my question would be, and to give some thoughts on this, where are the risks with Christians and cancel culture if they want to share an opinion, speak out, say, I don't agree with this? How does that affect us as well?
Yeah, I think Christians are for sure going to be canceled. You can be canceled for being an idiot, not because you're saying something virtuous or true or prophetic. But I think this, Jesus called us to be salt and light, and salt preserved things from decay. Salt was the form of money. It was actually where we get the word salary. It was the salary of Roman soldiers. And so salt preserved the meat from decay. It preserved things from decay. And our lives are supposed to preserve culture from decay. And sometimes that means speaking up. He said, you're salt and you're light. So salt brings preservation, and light to me brings perspective in darkness. So sometimes you got to be salt and light. I think, Jesus referred to his followers as sheep among wolves. I'm sending you as sheep among wolves. And, I think we're seeing that. I think we need the wisdom of Daniel to know when to speak and how to speak and in what settings not to speak. Not everything you believe needs to be said in every setting. There is a time and a place for that. But again, this is not new. Like Nero tried to cancel the church and it grew. Ahab and Jezebel tried to cancel Elijah, and he ended up silencing the voice of all their false prophets. I think it's impossible to totally censor the church, but the direction things are moving in can make it very, very difficult for schools, for churches, for nonprofits to preach the gospel, especially if in days ahead, preaching the gospel on sins, especially that have become socially acceptable, if they start labeling that as a hate crime, then that's really difficult waters because, Bible teachers are not going to change what they teach about the gospel. And so that's why I would say, I don't think cancel culture is virtuous. I think it's dangerous. I think ultimately it's about control and the lack of freedom of speech. And we'll talk maybe later. I do believe in consequence culture. I do believe there should be consequences for people that say things that are dangerous or threatening or bullying or, terrorists that are spreading propaganda for Al-Qaeda and trying to network with people. There's a time and a place for censoring and canceling someone's voice. But I think we have gone way, way beyond that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, let's kind of flip it a little bit and put the light on us. So when do Christians and Christian leaders tend to cancel people? When is that on us, where we've in the past or presently have been the one to cancel? I said a while ago, I said, this isn't new. Christians kind of have been doing it for a long time. If we see something we don't like, we kind of cancel them. So where do we do that? And are we justified in doing so? And if not, talk about more of a biblical response to those actions.
Yeah, so we said earlier that labels are for packages, not people. And I think we have labeled people in the past, and I'm talking to church at large, how we've handled the gay community, how we've handled people that have gone through a divorce, whole movements within streams of Christianity treat people that have been divorced massively different than people that haven't. And I think it's wrong. Like we said, every saint has a past. But because we believe grace is stronger than sin, that should inform how we honor people and the hope we have for people to change. It's been said by smarter people than me that acceptance is not the same thing as approval. I've got people in my life that I do not approve of their sinful lifestyle, and people have even tried to judge me for hanging out with them or having their name in my phone. But kind of my prayer is that if they're in a hard time, they wouldn't hesitate to reach out to me, even though I can't condone, their lifestyle. But I think church leaders, obviously we've gotten it wrong over the years, but I also think it's an easy parroted issue. It's easy for people just to say in a blanket way, oh, the church is so judgmental, to conveniently stay away from God, a God who is terrifyingly holy and loving. And so, I was taught, Pastor Mike Kavanaugh taught me this years ago. He said, listen, if people draw a circle that excludes you, just draw a bigger one that includes them. And not everyone is going to understand what it looks like to be a friend to sinners. And you may have grace to walk with other people that people don't, but we as a church have to be careful to remind people the good news of the gospel is the only cancel was our sins on the cross. I mean, Colossians says he canceled the written code against us. That's the only thing that was supposed to be canceled.
Yeah. So when, in your opinion, if ever, is cancel culture a righteous thing to do? And you kind of gave a few examples before, but is there a difference between cancel culture and standing up for what we believe in? Like, when is something cancelable, if you would?
Yeah.
That's even a word.
Yeah. And and to be honest, I grew up as a kid laughing, inwardly at my parents' generation that were pooling their influence to shut down certain companies that were doing things that they didn't like. As I get older, I kind of understand, why they were doing that. But I did, as a kid, snicker, like, what are we doing here? We're going to really, try to cancel Disney. But as far as when is it appropriate, I think, listen, when we are fighting for the unborn, when we are advocating for children who are caught in sex slavery, when we are fighting for those who can't fight for themselves or have a voice for themselves, I feel like it is a mandate, a holy thing to come against culture in that way. Jesus said, if we have enemies, we're called to love them and pray for them and serve them. But we are also called to resist their ideas. And that's where I feel like sometimes as Christians, we're like one or the other, like, oh, to resist this person's idea is to not be loving. Well, Paul said in 2 Corinthians, he said, demolish arguments that exalt themselves against the knowledge of Christ. Well, right now we've got a lot of, and it's easier said than done. It's hard to love people and demolish arguments. It's hard to love people and disagree. It's possible for sure, but I think that's what we're called to do.
Yeah. No, I mean, no one here signed up to hear me talk, but we have a family member who lives a lifestyle that we don't agree with, and for a while I don't want to say canceled her because we still were around her, but we set up more boundaries, and I think were necessary. And recently I was just very much convicted for that. And we had a conversation where it was, like you said, like, I don't agree, but I still love you, and like, I want what's best for you and all that stuff. And we kind of had that reconciliation, and just the tears in her eyes of saying, thank you for just loving me still. Like just to have that moment, I'm like, I thought I was right. And now, like, that's Jesus right there, that you still love
For
me.
sure.
No. So yeah, that just,
And I think just the humility of apologizing,
yeah.
you know, and just saying I was wrong. The heart can, the mind can be convinced, but the heart has to be won. And I just think, you know, we've got to keep both of those in mind. You know, you can convince the mind, but you have to win the heart, and you don't win the heart by just crushing someone's ideology or judging them.
Right.
However, so that's why I always say lead with grace and then follow up with truth. If you start with truth, sometimes things can get really distant, and then you don't have a chance to even win the heart.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, so we're already talking about one hot topic. Let's just add in another one and really mix things up. So, in your opinion, what's the connection between cancel culture and the other hot phrase right now, critical theory? Let's talk about that.
So huge topic. I'm obviously going to throw out an appetizer, and hopefully people will do their own study. You know, Paul called the Bereans a great company of people because they searched out what he said. So search out anything I'm saying. But I think cancel culture is the icing and critical theory is the cake. They're 100% connected in my estimation. You know, the cancel culture was the cultural revolutionary strategy used in Russia, Germany, Italy, Cuba, Venezuela. It's a playbook. It's an actual playbook. And so to give like a 3-minute history recap, I would say critical theory to me is rooted in Marxism. If you look at it, even the founders of BLM and others have openly stated that they're trained Marxists. Karl Marx, he died in 1881, but his ideas were carried on by other thought leaders. And so two of the ones that in America we know, one of them, his name is Antonio Gramsci. He was an Italian who was impacted by Mussolini and the Italian version of communism. And then another guy named Herbert Marcuse, who was affected by the German version of communism. And Marcuse is the guy that started a school called the Frankfurt School in America. And the basic idea of critical theory is this. Now we talk a lot about critical race theory, but the bigger idea of critical theory is this. All of life is broken down into two classes. You have the oppressor and the oppressed, or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the working class. The interesting thing is how subtle this can be. You know, we joke with people and say, oh, you're so bougie, you're so high maintenance or whatever. Well, bougie is just a short term for bourgeoisie. This is how like snake in the grass type approach this is. People don't see that connection, but Gramsci, the Italian communist, said, basically, if this is going to take root in the West and in America, we have to have a full infiltration plan. It's kind of the antithesis of what Lauren Cunningham from YWAM and Bill Bright from Campus Crusade from Christ and Lance Wallnau talk about with the 7 Mountains. Gramsci said we need to infiltrate entertainment, academia, all of these different places with these ideas of the two classes. And ultimately, the only way to overthrow the ruling class is to kind of join together these different minority groups, whether it be the LGBTQ community, African American community, Asian American community, any group that is a minority or discriminated against in some way, join them together so that they can make a larger segment and then eventually overthrow the oppressed. That's basically critical theory. The strategy that these two men brought, though, that ties into cancel culture is they actually had a term for it called repressive tolerance. Repressive tolerance just means if anyone in these minority groups that are oppressed in any way, if they speak up, even if people don't like sharing the bathrooms with different genders, even if these leaders don't agree with their ideas, repressive tolerance in this critical theory playbook says Anyone's life experience becomes the new objective of truth. It becomes the new moral authority. So you could never question someone's lived experience. That's why we hear the phrase "my truth" quite a bit. And so the connection between critical theory and cancel culture is, Gramsci said, repressed tolerance means accept any of these voices and even elevate the authority of these voices of intersectional minorities. The more intersectional and the more segregated, the better, honestly. Like if you're a woman who has been suppressed by men, but now if you're an African-American woman, or if you're an African-American woman in the LGBT community, your voice has that much more exponential authority under this kind of mindset. And at the same time, their plan for repressive tolerance was not only to accept and elevate these other voices, even if you didn't agree with them, shut down anything from the conservative side. Whatever is being said, you have to absolutely cancel that voice. Otherwise, you won't be able to have the clash of these cultures. So the crazy thing is, these guys put it in writing. They put terminology to what we're seeing. It's a legit playbook that they tried to institute many, many times in other places. And so it's C.S. Lewis. We quote him on a lot of other Christian things, so I'll quote C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, because he grew up in World War I, World War II era, communism was spreading around the world. He had a term for this. He called it Bulverism, talking about critical theory and cancel culture. Bulverism, I think he made the word up, honestly, but this is what it means. It means that if I disagree with you, then you don't even have to argue your principle against my principle. Just attack me as a person. Question my motives, and don't even spend time arguing idea against idea. Just cut the legs out from underneath me by attacking my motives as a person. For example, I may say the sky is blue, and Taryn could say, oh, you would say that. Oh, you're one of those blue skyer people. And C.S. Lewis created a term called Bulverism because he just saw conservative voices being shoved around, and people weren't even arguing idea to idea. They were literally just trying to project, oh, you would say that because you're racist, or you would say that because of, whatever. And so they try to discredit the person rather than debate the principle. And so that's the connection. Cancel culture is a legit part of critical theory. And you can do obviously a lot more study on that, but that kind of opens that door a little bit.
Yeah. Well, if C.S. Lewis said it, then it's true. So we'll just, right?
I think the thing that burns me the most about critical theory is that there are true legitimate trauma and pain within minority groups. I mean, if you look at my friend circle, none of them look like me, right? I was mentored by an African-American man for the past 25 years, been my spiritual father. My best friend was born out of the country and immigrated here. Like, my inner circle friends don't look like me. Their experiences have been different than me. But the thing that I hate about critical theory is these minority groups, they have to constantly feel victimized, or this approach in this strategy fails. You can't get the classes to fight each other if there isn't that constant trauma. So anytime there is any healing or progress, they have to try to rip the Band-Aid off to keep that wound fresh. And it just seems like a diabolical plan.
Right. So why do you think people are attracted to both, and why do you think both could be or are dangerous?
Yeah, I think critical theory is attractive because people want to live for something bigger than themselves. And so if I can join a cause, and to be honest, if I can join a cause where I don't have to submit to a holy God, that's a bonus. Like, I can be a part of something bigger, but not submit to a creator. And we can create our own kind of moral high ground that's separate from the Bible. I think it's also attractive because critical theory aims to combat injustice, and God loves justice. Injustice is evil. Oppression is evil. Racism is disgusting. And so there is that allure of, hey, I get to be part of a movement that is purging culture of something that is absolutely evil. But again, kind of, if you look up even the definition, again, defining terms is a big deal. Social justice in the Oxford Dictionary doesn't mean what a lot of us would actually think social justice means. Social justice in the Oxford Dictionary literally means when the state comes in and establishes equity, not equality. It's not, equality of opportunity, but equity of outcome, and it's state driven. That's what social justice, the original Oxford Dictionary meaning is. Now we throw around the term of social justice as if it's, a holy cause. And I understand why people do that, because we've attached different meanings to it. But that, again, that's why it's so insidious, because racism is so evil and destructive. And we should be champions of justice because God loves justice, but not retributive justice, but restorative justice. And that's where I see a big, big difference between the two.
Yeah. So before I do the last few, I just want to let you know, we're going to be wrapping up this portion of the questions. So if you did have any that popped in your head while we were chatting, we'll probably have time at the end to take a few. So you can just put those in the chat to me directly or to the group. So is there any reconciling the gospel with cancel culture or critical theory?
So I would say critical theory, and this is maybe new for some people, critical theory is like an actual religion. Mm-hmm. Just like materialism for science can become, certain atheists follow materialism and it's like a religion for them. Critical theory has prophets and martyrs and commandments and a certain value system. In fact, it has theological terms like original sin. America's original sin in critical theory is the sin of racism, having slaves on our soil. Even though 11 out of the 13 colonies were trying to get rid of slavery, even in the Declaration of Independence, but they knew if we weren't 100% unified, they couldn't put, we believe in every single word of this document. So it was removed and took another 88 years in the Civil War to even start uprooting the nastiness of slavery. But critical race is a religion. And I guess my biggest thing is, as you study it, it's antithetical to the gospel. And I'll give you one example. Critical race divides in 3 categories. Critical theory, I'll say. These leverage points. And it's racism, classism, and sexism. There are 3 leverage points for critical theory. Racism, classism, and sexism. And they're dividing points. It's the enemy literally trying to pull apart the fabric of a society. Whereas the gospel unites in solidarity mankind under 3 common banners. We're all made in the image of God. We all need redemption and liberation, but the oppressor is not another person or another class, it's sin. And we're all offered salvation that we don't get to struggle for or work for, but we get to receive by faith because of what Jesus struggled to overcome. So I think there's the huge difference where critical theory, honestly, the thing that's scary about it is there is no salvation. There is no end to it. And when you really study it out and you see it as a religion, there's only one commandment. Release the oppressed from the oppressor in whatever form that takes, at all costs. That's the one commandment of the religion of critical theory. Release the oppressed from the oppressor at all costs. And this is why a guy hanging out with Antifa was able to take a bike lock and smack another guy who was a Trump supporter over the head. Regardless of what you think about Antifa, critical theory, Trump, whatever, you don't slap somebody in the head with a bike lock and assault them because you disagree with them. And this guy was a professor of ethics, which the irony of it, I'm like, this is insane. But you have to understand, if he espoused to critical theory, he was following the one commandment of critical theory, which is I'm working to free the oppressed from the oppressor, and therefore it's okay. So, I just think they're very antithetical to each other, and that's what makes critical theory super dangerous.
I'll end my questions with this. So what should as Christians, Christian leaders, what should our response be to everything we just talked about?
Yeah. So the mind can be convinced, but the heart needs to be won. I think we have to love people that are dramatically different than us. I think we need to listen to people who have been hurt and traumatized with, just because I listen to you and just because I validate your pain and your experience doesn't mean I allow your lived experience to become the new absolute authority. on truth, but I do need to listen to you because people can't hear until they've been heard. And so I've got to listen. I've got to love with action. I've got to be willing to have people's names in my contact list that don't live like me or think like me or vote like me. And that's easier said than done. But I think the bottom line I would say is, you know, you got to love people, but you also have to demolish dangerous ideas. And that is really hard to do. I think Paul did it well. He said we have to demolish arguments and ideas that exalt themselves. We have ideas that are exalting themselves in our culture to the gospel. And some of the hardest conversations I've had with close friends is that I am working to help their segment of the population because they don't agree with my playbook. Sometimes there's a rub there. And so you just have to, which means you may need to figure out what's really going on and do some prayer, some study, lots of conversations with people you might not agree with.
Yeah. Thank you. That's all good. We have time for a few questions, so I'm gonna get to those in just a second, but just to take kind of that last thought into more realistic, like daily life choice. My friend group is all over the place on the map of beliefs. You know, we all have different levels of one voted for this person, I voted for this person, you believe this, I don't believe, like it's just all, and we've had those conversations before, but at the end of the day, what keeps us so tight, and I think people honestly think like it's almost impossible to really be tight with people who have different beliefs than you, but what kind of keeps us close is at the end of the day, we love each other so fiercely and we're willing to like show up for each other when all that stuff doesn't matter because your father just got diagnosed with cancer, or your husband just got diagnosed with cancer, or your child is going through a rough time. And I think that's when being the church really like matters. And it's like, I don't care who you voted for, you're going through a hard time. I don't care that you don't believe in this thing that I believe in. You're breaking down because you can't handle what life's handing to you. So I'm going to do what I was created to do and just love you in those moments. And right now that's my ministry, is just being there for these women who 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to be friends with because I had a different belief mindset, but I have gone to, yeah, like you said, like loving and showing up. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to compromise who I am just so I can deliver you better and you accept it. And I think people are more accepting of you not accepting their beliefs than we think. We just need to be willing, like you said, have a conversation with somebody whose belief system doesn't line up with you, because, and I think that's why we're here on this earth. If we were supposed to be with everyone we agreed with, then we would be up in heaven, but we're not right now. So
yes. Yeah, and I think Proverb says an open rebuke is better than hidden love. Like I should be able to openly disagree with you rather than having like hiding who I really am when I'm with you. You know, so I think, you know, it's right on. It's easier said than done. I'm by no means no expert at it, but trying to keep growing.
Yeah, and I yes, and like you said, everyone should do their own research and then come to that conclusion themselves. But we appreciate the voices who are willing to share, because not very many people are willing to speak into these areas. So I am going to do a few questions really quick. We're going to try to close up in about 5-10 minutes. So is it too, I'm going to keep these questions privately. So if anyone wants to unmute when I ask her a question and elaborate, go for it. But since they were sent to me privately, I'm just going to not say who the person was that asked the question. Is it too easy via the expanding social media to get caught up in an audience that we really don't traffic in? Caught up in a conversation that people we live with are not having? Where is the balance and how do we navigate? Uh-oh.
So I got knocked off, Taryn. I'm so sorry. I missed the first half of your question.
You're not where you just were a second ago. No problem. I'll say it again. Is it too easy via the expanding social media to get caught up in an audience that we don't really traffic in? Caught up in a conversation that the people we live with are not even having? Where is the balance and how do we navigate?
Oh yeah, I think the question gave us a great statement. I think the question is a statement in the fact that, yeah, I agree. I think we've got to be careful not to be swept up in extreme circles that we're not living with. You know, it's easy to say that you agree with something, but you got to walk that out with your neighbor and your cousin and your mother-in-law, and you know, I just think conversations change the world. Ideas change the world. You have to have conversations with people, and these disembodied voices on the internet, or people who you know, agree with you or disagree with you but don't know you, you know, it's just very, you're kind of, you know, you could be throwing more fuel onto the fire, and I don't necessarily think that's always the best approach. So I think the question had a great statement in it.
Another question we got was, how do we address where cancel culture has infiltrated Christian fellowships on college campuses?
It's infiltrated on so many levels. I almost don't even know where to tackle it. It's infiltrated seminaries. It's infiltrated how people interpret the Bible. Because if you quote certain portions of scripture, they'll say that that was, you know, written by an oppressor. And I mean, it's pretty vast. I just think having conversations where people don't use bulverism. I don't have to assume that you're a shady, evil person. I can just assume that maybe we disagree and we've had different upbringings and we need to talk. I just think the moment it starts getting personal, the moment people start getting doxxed, the moment things start getting dangerous, people showing up at people's houses and threats, it's like, well, now we're not having a conversation. It's just a battle, and we're scaring anyone else who actually has helpful ideas from even opening their mouth. And that's probably my biggest concern. I think we have brilliant Christians that want to love people, but they're afraid to say anything because they're going to be misconstrued or their words are going to be twisted. And so maybe the answer is we've got to be willing to show up and be misunderstood and be mislabeled in the name of God knows our motivation and we know what we're trying to do. And so, you know, show up in those places. But college campuses, ideas change the world, and that's where ideas are being, you know, discussed. And that's where honestly critical theory is being so deeply entrenched that you do feel like a sheep among wolves, but there needs to be intelligent, loving people that will bring another perspective and not just say it, but humbly try to live it in the way they care for people. I don't know if I addressed that well. Maybe Fred or someone on the call that's a little bit more acclimated in that culture could speak into it. I'm putting Fred on the spot.
And we'll just gladly move on. No, I think you answered that. I think it's a big question to answer too. Another one.
Could I add something into that kind of thinking?
Yeah.
So because of where I live and because of the church that I serve, there were very real dynamics in our congregation and in our community that we needed to have an answer for. We're in the South. We have the wrestling match with racism goes on daily. We live outside of a large campus. We have a high level of, we have a large homosexual community. We have an active LBG movement. We have gentlemen's clubs everywhere. And so there's a lot of dynamic going on there. And so we wrestled for months with some kind of statement that could help the people that we serve understand how we could live in this community, creating a community. And I'm just to be honest, I'm somewhat hesitant to say what the bottom line was because it sounds too easy. And so before I say the bottom line, I want you to understand, we wrestled for months about this, all right? And we had a 3-point thing. Number one, we are not going to condemn anybody. Nobody. I don't care if you were dancing at the Gentlemen's Club Saturday and came under conviction and just needed to get to church. I don't care if we're just not going to condemn anybody. The second point was we are not going to condone that which is, it's sinful, it's not true, it's damaging, it's not loving. For me to say, sure, continue in that lifestyle is just not a loving thing to do. So we're not going to condemn, we're not going to condone, and we believe with our whole heart and the way we live life that the gospel is transformative, that the gospel can transform lives. And so we were very, very busy with those 3 points with our people, equipping them to live in the community that we live in.
That is so good. That is so good. And you know, where we are in the greater Baltimore area, same with you, Randy, it's a hotbed. There are pockets around the country, and there were people who weren't satisfied we said enough. There were people who thought we said too much, and we tried to keep bringing it back to Jesus, because honestly, we have never baptized as many people as we've been baptizing. There is a move of God that's happening in the midst of all this craziness, and people have come out of their homes and out of their caves with mental health struggles and different things, and the gospel there's been an openness while there's this fierce resistance and almost trying to muzzle the church. We're seeing incredible transformative fruit. And so I just say, you know, what the enemy meant for evil, God's going to use it for good, whether it's critical theory or any of these dangerous things that are swirling around out there.
Yeah, that's a good closing thought. I'm going to do one more question, and then I will thank everyone for joining us. So last question. How does Matthew 18:15 work with accepting people in sin but not approving of it? The verses, I'm going to summarize it. If your brother or sister sins, go to them. If they don't accept it, basically towards the end of the verse, it says, they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So the question is, what does loving people look like while treating them as a tax collector that this verse points out?
Well, you said it, a key part of that verse is brother or sister. So I think we've got to make sure that they're a brother or sister. I'm not surprised when sinners sin, nor should any of us, right? I think the key part of that verse is brother or sister. And like Randy said, it wouldn't be loving if I told you to stay in this lifestyle that's literally damaging your psyche, damaging your body. I mean, if I love you, I'm going to want to tell you the truth. And if that means that you literally have to be removed from a small group or removed from a campus because of a certain time, I think the real love is having the strong boundary, having these super difficult conversation, and then the follow-up. The follow-up is where the love is seen. Putting it in your calendar to reach out to them, going out of your way to stop at their house, text them, call them, check in on them. Because again, at some point, there may be a leaning back and you want to try to win their heart without watering down the truth. Because it's so crazy to think somehow that we're more merciful than God or more loving than God. You know what I mean? He obviously loves them infinitely more than we ever could, but he is never going to compromise his holiness. But I think the key word is brother or sister. and we've got to be careful not to try to apply Matthew 18 to people who are not already in the church.
That's good. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and for joining us. I do want to announce one thing, and then Pastor Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you just to, if you want to share anything or give the goodbyes. But just to remind everyone that we did recently announce that we are having a one-day conference. And this one-day conference is not going to be virtual. It is going to be in person together in one building. The first one we've had, I believe, since Oasis 2019 that we've all been together. So Pastor Josh will be joining us for that. He will be one of our speakers. And we have Gary Ham with us. We have John Speaker with us, and a few others that we will be announcing later. So we will be doing that on September 16th, starting at 9 a.m. over at Elam Gospel. And then the night before, we're having a free worship night. So you will not need a ticket purchased to attend that. That's just something that we want to bless you with. We just want to be together and worship God. So we're going to be doing that the night before, and then the day of the one-day conference, we're gonna be together. We're gonna reconnect. We're gonna have free lunch on Pastor Chris. He's buying lunch for everybody, and we'll enjoy some speakers and just being together in one room. So I'm actually working on an email right now that should be sent out at 4 o'clock that kind of gives all the details that I just shared, just again in written form, and where to actually go and purchase your one-day ticket. And if you do not end up receiving that, you can always just reach out to me. My email address is marketing@elamfellowship.org, and I'd be happy to send you any information if you do not receive that email, but I'm guessing you all will. If you're here today, you are probably on our list. And I also just want to thank Pastor Josh for taking the time just to research and put together some answers for us for all my questions, and for, like I said before in the beginning, really taking time out of his very busy schedule to give us an hour of his time, just chat with us and spark some conversation, and hopefully encourage you to maybe go and talk to somebody new today that you might not have usually talked to, and just be able to love on them today. So with that said, Pastor Chris, I'm going to let you close us out and just however you would like.
Amen. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Josh, amazing. I appreciate your presentation. I think you probably scratched the itch, and hopefully we don't swat the fly. But I definitely feel that you brought some great things out that I think I'm just really excited that Elam Fellowship is having this conversation, because clearly I've been talking to my staff a little bit about it, and you hit some nuggets there. In particular, whether it's cancel culture or critical theory, the idea of the loss of redemptiveness in either one of those is really heart throbbing for me. And that's, we are called to be redemptive. We are called to be reconcilers. And so with that said, I'm glad that we are trying to tackle this conversation. I also, feel like the Lord is doing some things in me personally that I'm going to be sharing with our elders at our Council of Elders retreat in September, right before that one-day conference. And but I am finding over the last year that the church has attacked itself so many times over this last year. And there's a need for healing. There's a need for that redemptive nature to come back to us. And we need to begin to give grace. We need to begin to extend grace to one another in our differences, even in our differences, because I know that well-meaning people can get so caught up in all this and be, just build a dividing line. And so I think we need to be modeling. It says in the word that they shall know that you're disciples by your cancel culture, no, by our love for one another. And I think we have to really work hard at that. And so God is really dealing with me personally. I'm reading books right now that are helping me tap into the kind of loving God we have, so that I can be that kind of expression of love to the world that we are called to win. So that's kind of how I would want to end it. I think, Josh, great job again. Appreciated the questions and comments that we heard, and look forward to having this conversation continue. So, Taryn, with that, can I just pray for everyone? I think that'd be great to end it that way.
Yeah, of course.
Father, thanks so much for this group of leaders that are here on the screen. We all represent people that are touching the lives of other people who are confused. They have strongholds in their lives. And we pray, Lord, that you would help us hold captive the thoughts that you have for people, because you know the thoughts you have for people, not of evil, but to prosper and give hope. And so, Lord, help us learn, help us love, and help us listen in such a way that we would be able to capture your love and give it away and win people for you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, God bless you all. Thank you, Taryn. And without further ado, I hope you all can come out on the 16th. I think it'd be great to see you.